Welcome back to the Living Proof Recovery Podcast. We're your host. I'm Evan. This is Breezy.
What's up?
Tonight, I guess Brian's got a little something. We're just kind of shooting from the hip. So we'll go ahead and just dive right into this, and I'll let Brian kick it off.
Yeah, so I was thinking that we would kind of talk about tonight, like, what's the root of all of our troubles? You know, so I think it's real easy to get confused, or not really confused, just ignorant, you know, when we first come into AA or rehab or whatever it is, that we don't really understand what our real problem is.
It's drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, drugs. I mean, makes sense, right? Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and that's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
You know, I thought it was that. I thought it was my childhood. I thought it was my ex-wife. I thought it was my boss. Thought it was the fact that I'm not getting paid enough. I'm not appreciated or whatever, right? I thought all those things, but once we kind of get into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and we start reading in this book, you know, it kind of smashes that idea. You know, it kind of tells us what the real problem is. And there's a place on page 64 where it says, once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So that tells me that the spiritual malady is what I can treat. Mm-hmm. That's what can be treated, right? I can't treat the physical allergy. Yeah. There's no cure for that, right? I can't really treat my mind either. I can't think my way into better living. I have to live my way into better thinking. So I can't really treat those. God has to treat that. A power greater than ourselves has to treat that. But the way that we get there is through the steps, and which treat my spirit. And there's a lot of different terms in this book. Like Bill Wilson, when he writes, he'll say like the same thing over and over, but he uses different terms for things, you know, whether it's character defect, shortcoming, fault, wrong. These are all flaws. Like they all mean the same thing, you know, or in this instance, in step one, it says that are allowed to become unmanageable. Unmanageability is the same thing as the spiritual malady, which malady is just a fancy old word for sickness, right? Another word for that is untreated alcoholism. It's unmanageable, right? Or self will run riot, is because the spirit is me. You know, I'm the problem. It's the way that I think, I act, I behave, I react, my character. These are all an issue, right? So, and it describes the malady as looking like irritable, restless, discontent, prey to misery and depression, fear, resentment, uselessness, unhappy. I'm just uncomfortable all the time. When I don't, sober, right? That's a key thing to understand. Like sober, without drugs or alcohol, that is my default setting. Right? So that's what gets treated in steps 4 through 9, the action steps, right? So we have to treat this condition of self to get it right-sized, and so that our thinking becomes different, right? The way we act is different, things like that. And by getting rid of self, that connects us to the power, which keeps us sober, which straightens us. So if we straighten out this problem, this internal problem that I have, right? This internal unmanageability that I'm never comfortable. That's why I drink. That's why I use, right? Because it gives me a sense of ease and comfort. So I have to treat that. And by treating that, then I can get connected to the power that I'm searching for, right? So that's our real problem. And it says it on, I think it's like it's 60 to 62, somewhere in there. It's a selfishness, self-centeredness. That's the root of our troubles, right? We got to get down to the root. So I've been living off self-will my entire life, right? So think about like a tree, like the roots on a tree. Think about like how entrenched in the ground my roots are in self-will. So it feels uncomfortable and just outright weird to let go and let something else direct my life.
Right.
So that's the real problem. Because if that doesn't change, then all I am is just a dry drunk.
Yeah.
Right? I might not be drinking, but if I don't change my thinking, my behaviors, my actions, my character, if none of that changes, then nothing's going to change. I'm either just going to be a miserable, abstinent, person in recovery, not really in recovery, or I'm going to drink again. Like it's one of the two, so it says in the book that we have to, what does it say? We have to keep going. I'm going to butcher it, but it says something like we have two alternatives. Keep on going to the bitter end or accept spiritual help. Right. So that tells me right there, if I need spiritual help, then that means I have a spiritual problem. So that's what has to be treated. And I think that's kind of counterintuitive to what we would think is that, well, no, I need to treat my thinking. Well, the way that I treat my thinking is by treating my spirit, which changes the way that I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I know I said a lot there.
Yeah.
But
you did say a lot. No. But no, it does. I used to think that, how am I going to, I'm going to get sober. I'm going to get sober. All I got to do is stop drinking and stop drugging. And I did that many times, but it was not sustainable that way. I couldn't just taking the drugs and alcohol away is not the cure. And I have to keep this thing super simple, right? Because I'm a fucking idiot. So I have to keep it simple. And there's a reason, alcohol is only whatever program you NA. There's a reason drugs and alcohol are only mentioned in half
the first step. Right.
So out of the 12 steps, only half of a step mentions drugs and alcohol because that's not the problem. Right. And then we go on to, we address that we're powerless over drugs and alcohol in the first half of the step, and then our lives have become unmanageable. And then we get into 2 and 3 immediately, we come to believe in a power greater than ourselves. And then step 3, we're ready to turn our will and our lives over to the care of our higher power, right? And that, I think that freaks a lot of people out because we hit it so fast in that aspect. And it did me for a long time, right? But I had to realize that when I get to that point in 2 and 3, I'm only identifying that I'm not God. Is how I have to approach those steps. Is I'm not God. Something is greater than me. And
nothing's greater than you, bro.
I just have to be willing, because even at this point, so early on, like, I don't know what God's will is. I just have to be willing to do something different. It's that simple.
Gotta make a beginning.
I have to be willing to not just run off of my ways and my thoughts and what I think is right all the time, right? So I have to be willing to try something different. And it's like, if you think about it, it's, in 1, 2, 3, we're just coming to believe that, we're, like I said, we're not God. And then once we get into that 4 through 9, that's where, and it was crazy to me because I didn't know, especially in the beginning. I talked to so many different people about this whole God concept, right? From people who are deep into church, from people who are just deep into AA or just spiritual or what. I got so many different directions to go with it, and this is a God of my understanding. So I just started trying different things, right? I didn't know what I was praying to. I had no clue. So I was just willing to take some suggestions and try something that I haven't done before. And then in turn, so I'm getting through steps 1, 2, 3, and I'm like, man, I don't know what God's will is. I have no idea, but I'm just going to keep listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into 4 through 9, and that's where we're creating this blank canvas for God to work with,
Mm-hmm.
for Him to paint His masterpiece with, whatever that looks like, because
Yeah.
we're all so unique in
Mm-hmm.
so many different ways and beautiful in different ways. Not everybody is going to come out looking the same, right?
Right.
But we get to that point, and then after that, 10, 11, and 12, that's where we have to, we leave this masterpiece that God's working on out in the storms and in the sunshine, whatever it is. If we're not doing anything with it to keep it in pristine shape, it's going to start to weather. It's going to start to fade. You know what I mean? And that's
That's
what
a good
happens.
analogy.
You know what I mean? So we have to keep that up. And there's still, man, if I could figure out God, you know what I mean? What would I need this for?
Yeah.
So I don't pretend that I have this whole thing figured out. I just have a whole lot of fucking faith today.
Yeah, because you would be pretending.
Right. Yeah,
because we don't.
And then there's people that ask me questions about it, and I'm like, I don't have this thing figured out. I just know that this last 4+ years has not been me running the show. I know that for a fact. And I just keep putting in the work and having the faith and the hope and spreading this message to the best of my ability, and to keep growing. And I had to, this is what I was missing the whole time, right? Drugs and alcohol were just a symptom, as they say. It was just a symptom of what was really wrong with me. I had no belief in anything other than, like, drugs and alcohol were my master. That's what I believed in.
It's your higher power.
Yeah, they were going to get me where I wanted to be. But I had no motivation, no drive, no faith. I didn't care about anything other than the next one, right? And I just, like I said, I just know that.
What happened if something got in the way of you in the next one?
I mean, all bets
Had
were
to
off.
go.
Yeah,
It's got to go.
It had to
Sorry,
go.
I love you, babe.
Yeah, but,
But
right now, this is more important.
Yeah.
And sadly, that's
it's a
the
shitty
it
way to
was,
live.
man. And this just, I was having a conversation today with a guy at work, and and I think this guy is not in recovery, right? He's not an alcoholic. He's not an addict. He's one of those guys that can, like, smoke some weed here and there, and he's okay. He don't
The kind of guy that we're envious of.
kicking in doors and robbing
Right,
people.
yeah.
He can. He's a normal dude. You
Right.
know, but he came from a very rough background as far as his parents, the lifestyle he was raised in. And I always kind of knew that, but he kind of, we talked for a while today at work, and he kind of told me some of his story, and I was just like, man. And he kept talking about his parents and the things they were doing, and I was like, man, they are, like, we are the same. Like,
Right.
and he's significantly younger than me too, I think he's early 20s, he's a pretty young guy. But, it was just kind of crazy, and he was like, yeah, my stepdad, he used to be really heavy into Alcoholics Anonymous. And, for the last several years, he's not, like, he doesn't go to meetings, he doesn't do anything, he just
Right.
keeps to himself. And he started just telling me about all these things he's seeing that happen, and how, and everything he was describing, I'm like, man, he ain't been he hasn't been maintaining that
It's not plugged in. He's not plugged in. Yeah.
He wasn't he wasn't plugged in no more. And that's what I told him. I said, man, I've been there, and it was just kind of crazy. And so I've been kind of thinking about this all day. Like
operating on no power.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just like, man, because I've been there,
Mm-hmm.
It was, I don't know, it was just something that popped in my head with us on this topic, just how things can go south, because I can get to that point to where that spiritual malady, and I have found that my higher power can bring me out of this,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to stay in touch. I have to keep going. There's no taking my foot off the gas and trying to coast through this thing. That's not an option for me.
No.
It's just not.
No, I think so you had mentioned earlier, like steps 4 through 9, and we have to, so like an analogy just popped in my head, and you had a good analogy about the weather and, like a painting out in the weather. And I was kind of thinking of, like if I have my bathroom sink, right, if it gets clogged, right? So like a lot of times people will work the first 3 steps and go back out or just disappear, right? So if my sink is clogged, I can't see what's clogging it. But it's typically normally like some kind of debris, hair, something like that, right? I live in a house with 2 girls, so it's usually hair, right? So I can't see what the problem is. I can see the symptoms of it. I can see how it manifests, right? Water's coming up in the sink, right? So I know something's wrong, but I don't know what's wrong until I investigate it, right? And that's what we do in the 4th step, in the 5th step, right? We investigate what's clogging us from the power flowing through us, right? It's the same kind of thing, right? It's getting clogged up, and we got to get rid of what's clogging us, what's blocking us. We have to get rid of that. But the only way that we can do that is to really look at ourselves. Yeah. Like we have to look at self. We have to, and it's not pretty. Like it is not a pretty process. Like I think a lot of us make more out of it than what it really is. But still, even if we don't, it's still not an easy thing to see the exact nature of your wrongs. It's one thing to say like, yeah, I'm a liar. But then you look at like the exact nature of that is like, why are you a liar? Right. Why are you a thief? It's like, well, because I'm so incredibly selfish that I want what I want when I want it. So I will lie to my mother and steal her medication so that I get what I want when I want it, no matter what position that puts her in. Like, that's not pretty.
No.
To see that, right? To see the exact nature, but it's necessary. Like we have to see that because that kind of gives us this, oh shit, like I am, like I'm all these things, right? I come out of a 4th and a 5th step knowing what my defects of character are. I know I'm selfish. I know I'm dishonest. I know I'm full of fear. I know I'm inconsiderate and I'm self-seeking, right? All these things, no matter what my motives are. Right? Like, because sometimes I can be self-seeking when I'm trying to be kind. I'm trying to do something for you so that you'll like me. It's the right move, just the wrong motive. Right? So I got to investigate these things so that I can take those things and ask God in 6 and 7 to remove them. But they don't all just get magically removed. And you kind of touched on this, right? Because what would be the point if my higher power said, okay, Brian, I'm taking all of your flaws. Now you're perfect. Yeah. Right? Well, then how's he going to use me if I'm perfect, right? Because if you're a newcomer, you're not going to relate to me. You're not going to want to talk to me if I'm perfect. You're never going to live up to my expectations you're always going to compare yourself to me, like, because I'm perfect. So that's a lot of times why a lot of things don't get removed. And just my opinion, right? I don't know, but I would think that that's why a lot of things don't get removed, because that would make me perfect. And then why do I need God? That's kind of what you touched on. Like, why do I need it? Why do I need AA? Why do I need a program? Why do I need that? Because I'm perfect, right? So we don't come out of those steps perfect, but we do come out of those steps, and then we follow that up with, making restitution to other people that we've harmed. And we come out of that whole process with a different psyche, with a different perspective on things. And we think differently, we act differently, we react differently. And then, like you said, we got to maintain that stuff, right? And step 10 is huge for me, because that's how I practice steps 4 through 9 on a daily basis, is through step 10, right? And also 11 and 12, but 10 especially, because I have to look at these things as they happen in my life, because I can't get clogged back up again, right? Because that can happen really easily. And that's a good barometer for me to know if I'm living on self-will, because I'm full of resentment, I'm full of fear, I'm being dishonest, or I'm being selfish. Like, those are all indicators to me that I'm running on my will, because I don't think my higher power wants me to be any of those things. No. So it's a good indicator for me. That's kind of how I know, like, okay, like, we need to really take a look at some things. But that's the beauty of investigating and getting these things out in practice and discipline, right? Because we have to practice these things, because I've practiced my whole life doing it my way, right? So learning something new to be good at it takes a lot of practice. But we're not going to do it perfectly. I'm going to screw up. There's going to be days when I don't do a 10th step. There's going to be days when I don't pray. Like, I don't like to admit that, but it's true. Like, there's days when I get caught up, I get caught up in my own shit, and I don't apply everything that I know that I need to apply. And that kind of lets me know when I get like that, because in a very short period of time, I start to catch resentments, or I start to get fearful, or I notice myself telling little bitty lies, and I'm like, man, I can't, what am I doing? I got to get my shit together. But that's the beauty of it, right? Is that I know I have a program that I can go back to. And I think it's important to understand, like, what a program is, right? So I went up to RAC Sunday, or Saturday, and was speaking to the clients. And one guy was telling me that he was like, I've been going to, I've done AA. And I was like, okay, like, what did that look like? Like, did you have a sponsor? And he's like, no, I didn't have a sponsor. Okay. So you didn't work any of the steps? No, I was doing 90 and 90. It's like, okay. So you weren't in the program. You're in the fellowship, which is great. Like, we need the fellowship. Like, that's important. But it's important to understand, like, what a program is. So a couple days ago, I was like, I'm going to look up the definition of a program and just see I know what the program is, but, like, what is the actual definition of a program? It's basically is a series of events or steps that bring about a desired result or outcome, right? So that's exactly what this is. The 12 steps bring about a desired result or outcome, which is sanity, freedom, and a relationship with a power greater than ourselves.
When you follow the process.
when you work the program, right? So, but just going to meetings isn't a program. That doesn't bring about a desired result. Doing it your way doesn't bring about the desired result.
Right.
So we have to kill self. And I've done that. Where I'm like, I got it figured out. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's my plan. And it just never worked, because my plans are all rooted in selfishness and self-centeredness. What can I get out of this? And I think my intentions were always good, but they were rooted in half-truth and in selfishness. I want to recover so that, I can have this or I can have that. It's not so that I can help the next guy.
Right.
It's so, what do I get out of this? I want to know, like, what do I get? What's my prize? Like, I want to know what my prize is. It's like it's like a game at the arcade. Like whack-a-mole. This is a good example of self-will, right? Whack-a-mole. You know what whack-a-mole is, right?
Of course.
So when you start out at whack-a-mole, it goes real slow, right? And it's like, one pops up, tap him with the little mallet. You wait a second, the other one pops up, and you're like, man, this is easy. I got this. And then it starts to speed up a little bit. And you're like, okay, like I can still handle a little bit, but then it starts going really fast. And as you're focusing on this over here, now everything's fucked up over here, right? And so my attention goes to this side, and then now everything over here is fucked up. And that's what it's like living on self-will. It's like I'm focused on this right here, and soon as I seem to get this over here intact, the rest of my life falls apart. And I'm like, I got to focus on that. I got to control that. I got to fix that. So I focus on fixing that. And then this shit over here falls apart. And I can never get everything together. Right. And I mean, I just think like that's my life ran on self-will. It's like I'm putting all my focus on something to fix it. But then as soon as I do that, everything else falls apart. And I'm just playing this game of catch up all the time. And something's always falling apart when I'm doing that, right? So I don't know. I think that's a good way for me to sum up the way that I run on self-will.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same way for me, And it took some trial and error to figure that out. What was this thing about? I was in and out for so long, and it's always about that. Like we talked about before, that false sense of control that I always thought I had, and then there was times through sobriety where I still brought that with me, after having some time sober. And I just know still to this day, there's sometimes where I'm like, man, what is God's will? And it's pretty simple when I think about it. Because it's not my will. Because there's
right.
Still now there's times where it's like, I'm going to do this because this is what I want. And then I start to think about it and I'm like, but that's not the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I can still try to run on my own will, but I
do sometimes.
Yeah, but I'm able to see that today.
Mm-hmm.
So like we talked about 4 through 9, when we get to these steps, and a lot of people think, well, I work step 3, I'm supposed to be running on God's will only now. But we don't, like I said earlier,
it don't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. I don't know what God's will is. And then
plus that you're blocked from it.
Exactly. I'm blocked from being able to do God's will, but that's where we start to clear it out. And that's where we learn what God's will is, and it's literally everything we're clearing out. I keep it, like I said, I have to try to keep it so simple, but it's just that, doing the next right thing, forgiving people. God doesn't want me running around here being resentful over every little thing.
No.
And if I do catch a resentment, I know how to deal with it immediately now, right? And just working on myself and these character defects, and when he sees fit, he will remove them. He's not always going to remove all my defects because sometimes they can be useful.
Absolutely.
When the motives and the intentions are right.
Yes.
Some of them can be used for good and bad.
Yeah. If you're using them selfishly, they're usually not right.
And then, like I said, being able to right all these wrongs, and I just know that sometimes it's hard for me to put it into words, because I just know it's not me running the show, because I know what happens when I try to. And sometimes my wife will tell you, sometimes I'm a little too chill for her, So when things are hitting the fan, just like your explanation earlier with the whack-a-mole, right? Things can be hitting the fan all around us.
Things are popping up everywhere.
Things are popping up, and I'm able to sit in it today and understand that I can't control all of this fucking mess that's happening right now.
Yeah.
But how are we going to get through what's right here in front of us at this moment? And let's get through it. And then, you know what I mean? And in God's timing, you know what I mean? Things will work themselves out. I don't have to try to smash everything down all at one time and hit every fucking mole upside the head.
Right.
You know, I don't have
trying to get that big ass teddy bear.
Right. You know, I'm able to sit in things, and I just know, because when I start trying to just be like, you know, I got to control this and then fix this right now over here and fix this, I will burn shit to the ground.
Yeah, you get overwhelmed.
Yeah. And now I'm freaking out, and now I'm yelling at my wife and kids, and she's yelling at me, and, you know what I mean? I'm yelling at coworkers or acting a fool. Like, you know, it just gets so out of whack.
Here's what happens when we do that. Here's what we're doing. We're trying to do things that only God can do. Right? So God will only do for us what we can't do for ourselves. Right? But there's a lot of things that I can't do myself. I can't remove the obsession to drink myself. I can't just change the way I think. I want to think different. You know, that doesn't work like that. Right? So a common thing you hear in rehab, you can ask anybody that's in rehab, why are you here? They'll say, I'm here to get sober. It's like, newsflash, buddy, you're already sober. You're sober right now. You're not trying to get sober. What you're trying to do is you're trying to learn how to live in sobriety without needing to go back to a drink, right? So you need to focus on the things like destructing self that you can do for yourself with God's help. And then God will take care of the keeping you sober, right? God will take care of the outcomes. We just have to, you know, like it talks about in the big book, that He is the director. It's like part of step 3, that we have to realize that we're no longer the director, right? So basically He's our daddy, right? You know, so, and you mentioned something about He doesn't want us going around being resentful. Well, if we believe that we are all His kids, you know, I believe that we're all children of the same God, you know, that God doesn't want me mad at my brothers and sisters. Doesn't want me at odds with everybody else. And it's kind of hard for me to say that, or to ask for forgiveness when I'm unwilling to forgive. You know, I don't think it works that way. I just don't. I don't think God's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to give you forgiveness, but, you know, fuck everybody else. You know, I don't think it works that way. You know, so I've got to be able to, I can't walk around with hate in my heart. You know, whether it's towards a certain gender or lifestyle. I don't have to agree with what people do, but I can't walk around just hating groups of people. You know, like, but then preach love and tolerance. You know, that's hypocritical. And that's one thing that we find out when we do an inventory, is that we're fucking hypocrites, man. You know, like if someone did to me half the shit that I did to other people, I'd want to kill them. You know, I would. Like, I'd be like, I'm going to kill this motherfucker. Like, you know, but I went and did the same thing or something much worse, but I deserve forgiveness. But he doesn't, but fuck him. You know, that's not a good way to live. You know, it's just to walk around with hate in your heart or resentment. And that doesn't mean I don't ever get resentments, because I do, you know, but we have tools to deal with them today, you know, so I don't, it's like a pig rolling around in the mud. This is, I guess, the analogy episode. So, you know, like pigs roll around in the mud and they stay in it, man. It's like, that's what I used to do. I used to roll around in mud and just be dirty as fuck all the time. Just grimy, covered in mud all the time. And the difference today is sometimes I fall down in the mud, but I don't stay in it. Like, I don't roll around and play in it and, you know, just find comfort in it. Like, I don't like to feel that way. I used to have that justifiable anger all the time, or the justifiable victimization that I used to wear like a badge of honor. I don't do that today. Like, I don't like feeling that way today. And like, that's a huge blessing, because soon as I start to feel that way, or if I feel I wrong somebody, it doesn't sit right with me, whether I think I'm right or not. I'm just like, man, like, that just don't feel right. And it doesn't. Like, I got to clean this shit up.
Yeah.
And
I think that today, like, God will show me things, right? In different ways, whatever it is. But if I'm not right, if I'm not doing everything I should be doing, He'll show up in one way or another to test me. Just
in teaching moments,
right? In teaching moments, and it's kind of like, now I'm able to sit back and be like, man, what am I missing right now? What do I need to do a little more of? And you had mentioned when you went to RAC and asked them why they were here, right? I want to be sober. So I had a sponsor, and he was my sponsor for a long time, but he used to always ask me, why do you want to be sober? I would relapse and then come crawling back to his feet.
Right.
Please sponsor me again. Please, please sponsor me. And every time he would ask me, have you had enough pain? Only I knew the answer to that.
Yeah.
It was, you know what I mean? He was
the answer's always yes.
Yeah, so he would always tell me, like, have you had enough pain? And then I would open my mouth to start, and he would be like, don't answer me. He's like, only you know the truth. Right. You're going to tell me what I want to hear.
Exactly.
He's like, but don't even answer. I'm just asking you. This is for you to answer internally. And, of course, I have. I'm ready. And then he would say, why do you want to be sober? And I would always tell him all these things, different things. Well, I want to be a better dad. I want to be a better son. I want to, you know what I mean? All these different answers.
Reasonable things.
All reasonable things. And he would be like, keep thinking about it. Come back to me later. And you know what I mean? I would never, there's only one answer, right? But you just gave it. I wish you didn't, almost. To live.
Yeah. Survive.
Period. That's the only answer. Why do you want to be sober? Because I want to live. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I never knew that, right? You know what I mean? I was always all these other things. But when I get sober, and then I get some of this freedom, now I'm living. Now I am the dad I'm supposed to be, and the husband, and the employee, and the friend, and the brother, and the son. I'm all these things. I get to experience you know what I mean? Now I'm really living.
Kicking ass and taking names.
Right, because when it comes down to it, I can want to be a better father and all these things I've said, but if I don't treat this thing, I can't reach those goals. You know what I mean? I can't. If I'm running around dry and I'm still irritable and restless and discontent all the time, no one's getting the best version of me. I can't give that to anyone. Yeah. I have to get down to the root of the problem, and that's where living begins. But he used to, that sponsor I had, he's a great guy, but he used to irritate me because I would just be like, tell me the fucking answer, and he would never tell me. He would never tell me. Yeah. Dude, I swear it was probably years before he finally told me. You know what I mean? I'd be like, why won't you ever just answer the question? But by that point,
what if he was like, because I don't know the answer?
Right. But by that point I knew the answer, but it took, I would ask him over and over and over, and for a long time he would never tell me because he wanted me to figure it out. You know what I mean? So, but that's what I kept thinking about was a previous sponsor I had, and he always used to ask me that question. And in early sobriety, I couldn't. I would get so irritated because I'm like, I don't know the answer. So I can just see some of those guys in there. I don't know if you told them what the answer is. But they were probably like, this motherfucker, he didn't even answer. I don't think I did.
I don't think intentionally. I don't think I did. So, no, actually I did. I told him, it's like, basically I just said,
if you do this for any reason, do it just out of mere survival.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do it to survive. Like, that's what, like, our most primal instinct is to stay alive. Like, that was a lot of the reason why I kept doing drugs. It's because I thought it was keeping me alive. You know,
Yeah,
it was
but
survival.
today I look at it. I look at it differently
I do
today.
too. I don't look at it like I'm doing this to stay alive. I don't look at it that way.
Right. So in that sense, like, yeah, you're doing it to live, but like why I'm doing this
To
because
experience life.
I'm really wanting to live.
Yeah.
You know what
Actually
I mean?
live, not just
Exist.
exist.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good distinction
Yeah.
to make. You know, but sometimes in the beginning, like maybe that's where we need to be. Like when we're desperate, it's like I don't want to die.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that
Absolutely,
needs to
yeah.
evolve. It does need to evolve, and I think what it all comes back to is what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to work for? You know, because and they say it at the end of pretty much every AA meeting, and if you don't, you hear it at some point in the meeting. Is works if you work it. It's not works if you know it.
Yeah.
Or works if you want it. Doesn't matter how bad you want it if you don't fucking do it. Like that's just the fact.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the truth, right? I don't care how bad you want it. If you're not willing to do what you need to do, then maybe you don't want it as bad as you say you do.
Yeah.
As you think you want the idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
But are you willing to like do what you got to do? Are you willing to have to look at another man across from you and tell him these secrets, these things you're ashamed of? You know, because if you're not, you're just spinning your wheels, right? Because our secrets keep us sick, and if we want to hold on to that stuff, you know, we got to do inventory next week at work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, see, a lot of times what we want to do is we want to go into like a fifth step and tell somebody about the little things, you know, things that we're okay with people knowing about. But like when we're taking inventory at work, it doesn't really make a big difference if I don't count this bolt over here or this nut that is 32 cents.
Right.
But if I have a transmission that's a $6,000 transmission in the back and I don't count that, that's going to make a big difference. You know, if I don't look at that, I need to look at that. Or if I've got, you know, a bunch of parts that aren't selling and we're just holding on to them, that's just tied up money. That's not good for the business. But if I look at it like, you know what, let's go ahead and we need to move these bolts out of here because we have $30 worth of bolts. We need to get rid of these. But I got $20,000 of something else in the back that's been sitting there for 2 years. You know, that's what's going to kill me, not the bolts. The bolts aren't what's going to kill me, right? So I got to have some humility, some willingness, got to level my pride and just say, hey man, like, here it is. You know, here it is. Like, 'cause that's where the freedom starts, like, to come in is, you know, we unpack some of that stuff, and that's when we start to feel the power. You know, because alcoholism responds to that. It responds to power. It doesn't respond to my intellect and that's the problem sometimes. Like, I've noticed, and maybe, I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but the hardest people to work with are really intelligent people, super religious people, and like rich people.
Yeah.
Or like beautiful people that have been like insulated by those things. You know, it's like I'll think my way out of it. I'll buy my way out of it. I've always gotten what I want because I'm pretty. You know, things like that. Or you know, it's like I just want those people to wake up tomorrow broke, dumb, and ugly.
Right.
And then maybe they'll get this thing.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like there's a lot to it, but like it all starts with self. Is what it all comes back to. You know, whatever the character defect is. You know, we can write out a character defects list that has 3,000 things on it, but they all come down to the 4 character defects of I'm afraid, I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, and I'm angry. Like you know, like or self-centered. Like they all come back to those. They all fall under those things. You know, I'm a victim because I'm selfish.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid. You know, I'm insecure because I'm afraid. You know, I'm not going to get what I want. You
Yeah.
know, like they all come back to those things, those core things that we inventory in step 10 that we have to watch for. Right? In step 10, it says we watch for these things as they crop up. You know, and at once we deal with them. You know, I don't wait till the end of the night to do a 10th step. Like I do an inventory at night. That's the part of the 11th step. The 10th step says I do this thing as it happens.
Yes.
At once. And it gives like perfect instructions in this book of how to do it. And before you know it, it's like by doing a 10th step, for me, this is just for me, like that is the most important step for me. Like at this point of my recovery, right? It all goes back to step 1, but you know, like 1 and 12 kind of bookend everything. But 10 is like, as far as like me maintaining and growing, like that's what I have to do, because by doing step 10, I'm doing steps 4 through 9 on a daily basis, and I'm practicing the principles in all of my affairs. That's what makes me, it's like sharpens my tools. You know, it keeps me in a place where I don't get stagnant. So I know, like, we've been talking about all the steps basically,
Right.
but you know, they've just become a part of my life today. And
Oh, yeah.
like you were talking about living and dealing with hard times or situations that pop up, you know, and like I've had a rough go of it lately, like just mentally and emotionally. You know, I've had things going on in my family that are not easy to deal with 2 of my children, and it's like I'm powerless over it. But I've been able to have like a positive outlook on it with my kids and with my wife, and trying to help instead of making it about me. You know, because that's where it would go 5 years ago. It would have been like, I'm a victim. Like, why is this happening to me? I'm sober.
Oh, yeah,
Why is
poor-
this happening
poor
to me?
Brian.
Poor
Yeah.
Brian. You know, I can't catch a break. Like, that's what would have happened. And I know that for a fact, because that's what always did happen. You know, until something changed. And it's the program and God that changed that.
Right.
You know, I didn't do it. I had to do some of the work. I had to do some of the legwork, but I'm not responsible for the change, and I'm not responsible for the result. I'm responsible for the work. I'm responsible for showing up. You know, it's like I'm no longer in management. I don't tell people what to do at the job site. You know, I do what my boss tells me. And by doing that, I stay out of trouble. And I stay employed.
Yeah.
You know, and I get paid. You know, it's a pretty awesome thing to know what's wrong with you. And to like realize there's a solution for it. Because when you don't understand what's wrong with you, man, you don't think there's a way out. Like it seems hopeless. It's
Absolutely.
like there's not a way out, man. Like I don't even know what's wrong. How do I fix it? You can't. That's why it says we need God's help.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's, you know, and just once we do this thing, man, and really give in to this whole process, and like so many crazy things just happen and unfold, and things we never imagined. And you know, even something as simple as last night, man, you know, yesterday was my wife's 40th birthday, right? And last night, you know, we threw a surprise birthday party and dinner for her, right? And I could just feel it in the room. You know, it was the love in the room, and it was, I don't even know how many people were there. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was, you know, there was like 10, 12 people in the room, and I just was sitting there at one point looking around, and I'm like, man, he's got 20 years. She's got 15 years. She's got 5. She's got 20, you know, and I'm just sitting around, and I'm like, dude, there's so much sobriety in this room right now, and so much laughter and love, and just everyone in the moment and just living. You know what I mean? And I was like, man,
Beautiful thing.
I was like, look, God did this. Put all of these people in this room together to celebrate her. None of them had to do that. My only job was to get her there and keep it a secret. Right? Yeah. That was my job. Get her there, keep it a secret. Don't let her know where you're taking her. And these people went out of their way to show all this love for her. Like, and it was awesome. You know, it was a great time. And, you know, just the miracles that happen, and just to have that many sitting at a table, it was awesome. You know, and that's living. That's part of living. You know, it's great. And now tomorrow we get to go in the cabin in the mountains. You know what I mean? That's, if I was trying to run this show on my will, we wouldn't be able to do these things and have these relationships.
We're going to stay at the motel.
Yeah, we're going back to
because I spent all of the money on that.
Yeah, we're going to the Motel 6 in Shepherdsville. You know?
Talking to Ford.
Right.
You know, right. Another bag.
Right. So, you know, it's just, man, it's just crazy today, man. It's amazing. It's a miracle. It really is. It's a miracle, you know, that we get to live the lives that we live today, and it's all due to God and this program and this simple set of instructions that if we just thoroughly work these steps, the results are incredible.
Yeah. I mean, what do you got to lose?
Yeah, I had nothing to lose.
I know.
You know,
it's like I already lost. I already gave it away.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, why not give it a shot? Maybe it works. If it doesn't, just go back to doing your shit. You know, if it doesn't work, but at least give it a shot. At least go all in, abandon yourself to it. You know, go about it just like you would, you know, going after that girl that you like, or going after that job, or going after that next bag of dope.
Yeah.
You know, same thing. Go out with that same zeal, and dude, you'll just be amazed with what can happen. Like, you know, and like I was thinking the other day, like, we can't help someone if we're in the same place they are. Right? So, like, a dead battery can't charge another dead battery. You know, so, like, I have to grow in my spirituality, my life, my relationships. That way I can help the next person. Because I can't help them if I'm still sick. You know, if I'm still in that same mindset of, I haven't drank, but I'm sick, you know, how am I going to help somebody? You know, what am I going to tell them to do? Just stay sick. You know, like, that doesn't work. You know, like, so we have to recover. You know, I think that we're all spared for a reason. I think that we are all put in a position by our higher powers to help the next person. Like, that's the ultimate act of unselfishness, right? Is to give. That's what charity is all about. You wouldn't say charity is selfish, you know, because it's about being charitable. It's about doing some altruism. It's about doing something without expecting something in return. But by doing something without expecting it, I get it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, like, so, like, I don't work with others to stay sober. I used to think that, but then I realized, like, no, I'm using these people to stay sober, and that's selfish, right? So I look at it now as, I get to do this.
Yeah.
I get to help people, and as a reward, I get to stay sober. But that's not why I do it. I do it because I love alcoholics. I love drug addicts. I love to see, you know, people recover. You know, because I might have a kid down the line that's heading this way. You know, and I need somebody in the room that is going to be able to help them. Because I'm probably not going to be able to. I might be able to set an example, but I'm not going to be able to. I don't see myself sponsoring one of my children. You know,
right.
So I think we
not recommended.
Yeah. You know, we need people out there on with the facts about themselves. About they know what's wrong with them. They know how to recover. You know, they know these things, so that they can help the next person. Because that next person that I work with, or that you work with, that's somebody's kid.
Mhm.
You know, so we need to be armed. Like, we need to know what we're doing.
Mhm.
You know, we need to know where our power comes from, and we need to know how to carry it. We need to carry the message, not the alcoholic.
Absolutely.
You know, and I hope I never have to worry about that, about one of my kids. You know, but if that ever comes up, like, I know where they need to go. Whether they'll go or not, I don't know. But I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that. But
Yeah.
I'm just rambling now, just talking shit. But, you know, I just think it's so important that we show up.
Mhm.
Like, that's our job. You know, we're not in the, I think I've said that on here before, but we're not in the results business. We're in the business of showing up. You know, maybe we can help somebody turn the mess into a message, you know, instead of more mess. You know, so
Yeah.
I don't know. So just like solving any problem, you gotta find out what's wrong with you.
Yeah. You got to get to
You
the
gotta
root.
get to the root of what's wrong. You know, you can't just put band-aids on cannonball wounds all day. You know, doesn't work.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. You're gonna bleed out.
And this is so for me. I know there's more than one way to get there,
For sure.
but this is the only way I know. You know, and I will continue to spread the message to help other men and women. You know, alcoholic or normal,
Yeah.
because this can be beneficial to anyone. You know, so. But you got anything else before we wrap her up?
No, I think that's it, man. I know you're ready to hit the road. Enjoy
Gotta get-
living.
Enjoy living. Got to
Yeah.
get to packing.
Are you haven't packed yet?
No, of course not, bro.
No,
No,
last minute.
procrastination.
Right.
Still a defect.
Yeah.
You know? So
It's being removed
got it.
slowly.
Yep, got a lot to get done before tomorrow morning. So
Yeah. All right, man. Well, good talk, man. I appreciate, you know, everything you do.
Yeah.
You know.
Same here.
Yeah. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, well, not complaints. We don't want to hear any complaints. Please leave us a comment, give us a like, you know, subscribe. If you're not already subscribed, you should be. You're missing out if you're not. It's a defect of character.
absolutely,
So,
gotta remove that.
yeah, got to remove that. So, I don't know. I don't have anything else. Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.